Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I stand before you with a simple yet profound truth. When God leads, everything always falls into place. You planned, you strategized, you pushed, but nothing seemed to work. Frustration set in, and you asked. The answer is simple. Without God's leadership, we walk in circles instead of progress. The book of Proverbs tells us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." Proverbs 3:5-6. When God leads, he orders your steps. He positions you in the right place at the right time with the right people. Even what seems like a setback is actually a setup for something greater. Look at the life of Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, thrown into prison. Yet, because God was leading him, everything fell into place. At the right time, he was elevated to the highest position in Egypt, fulfilling the very dream God had placed in his heart. You see, when we allow God to take control, we don't have to force things to happen. Obedience unlocks favor. The doors that seemed locked for years suddenly open without struggle. The connections you never thought possible come effortlessly. But here's the key. God's timing is not our timing. Sometimes we feel like we are delayed, like we are stuck in a waiting season. But let me remind you, delay is not denial. God is preparing you, strengthening you, and positioning you for the perfect moment. The evidence of God's leading is peace. If you are restless, anxious, or forcing things, it's a sign that you need to pause and seek his direction. But when you follow him, even in the midst of storms, there is peace. When God leads, clarity replaces confusion, and life takes on a sense of divine alignment. Many people wander through life, trying to piece things together on their own, relying on their intellect, resources, and connections. They chase success, relationships, and opportunities, yet find themselves frustrated when things don't go as planned. But there is a higher way, a path where God himself orders your steps, making sure you are exactly where you need to be at the right time with the right people. This is divine alignment. And when you walk in it, things that once seemed impossible become effortless. Divine alignment is not about luck or coincidence. It is about walking in sync with God's purpose for your life. He has already mapped out the journey, prepared the opportunities, and set the right connections in place. But it is only when we surrender to his leadership that we begin to see these pieces come together. The challenge many people face is that they try to lead themselves rather than allowing God to take the wheel. They make plans and then ask God to bless them, instead of seeking his plan first. Yet, when God is leading, clarity comes because we no longer have to guess or force things to happen. His leadership provides direction, and when we follow, we avoid unnecessary detours, delays, and disappointments. Think of a puzzle. When the pieces are scattered, it seems like an impossible task to put them together. But when you follow the right pattern, the picture becomes clear. Life is the same way. Without divine alignment, life feels like a series of disconnected events. Things happen, but they don't seem to make sense. However, when God leads, everything connects with purpose. Every experience, every challenge, and every opportunity fits into a bigger picture. Even the things that seem like mistakes or setbacks are actually part of a greater design. God does not waste anything. He uses every season of your life to position you for the next. One of the greatest struggles people face is making decisions. The fear of making the wrong choice can be paralyzing. But when God is leading, decision-making becomes easier because clarity replaces confusion. There is a peace that comes with knowing that God is in control. His word says in Psalm 37:23, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way." This means that when we submit to God, he takes pleasure in directing us. He removes the guesswork and provides guidance, whether through his word, inner peace, or divine connection. The story of Abraham is a perfect example of divine alignment. God told him to leave his country and go to a land that he would show him. Abraham didn't have all the details. He didn't know exactly where he was going or how things would work out. But because he followed God's leading, he stepped into divine alignment. Everything he needed was provided along the journey. When God leads, you don't need to have all the answers in advance. You simply need to trust that he knows the way and that he is aligning everything for your good. Many times, people resist God's leadership because they are afraid of the unknown. They want guarantees before they step out. They want to see the full plan before they follow. But faith does not work that way. Divine alignment requires trust. It requires believing that even when you don't see the full picture, God is still working behind the scenes. Think about a GPS. When you enter a destination, the system calculates the best route. You may not see the entire journey at once, but as you move forward, step by step, directions become clearer. The same happens when God leads. As you take each step in faith, the next step is revealed. When God is leading, he also aligns you with the right people. Not everyone in your life is meant to stay forever. Some relationships are seasonal, and others are part of your destiny. When we try to hold on to the wrong people or force connections that God never intended, we end up frustrated. But when God leads, he orchestrates divine relationships, people who will pour into your life, challenge you to grow, and help you fulfill your purpose. He also removes people who no longer align with where he is taking you. There are countless stories in the Bible where divine alignment brought clarity and purpose. Joseph was sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, yet each event aligned him for his destiny. If he had not been in Egypt, he would not have become a ruler and saved many lives. What seemed like a series of unfortunate events was actually God's divine alignment. When God is leading, what looks like setbacks are often setups for something greater. When clarity comes through divine alignment, fear is replaced with faith. Anxiety is replaced with peace. Striving is replaced with rest. You don't have to manipulate situations or force doors to open. When God leads, the doors that need to open will open effortlessly, and the doors that are not meant for you will remain shut. It is a freeing way to live, because you realize that you are not in control. God is. As you navigate life, ask yourself, are you leading yourself or is God leading you? Are you making decisions based on logic, pressure, or emotions? Or are you allowing God to align you with his perfect will? When you follow his lead, clarity comes. Life no longer feels like a chaotic struggle, but a journey of divine alignment where everything falls into place at the right time. Obedience is the key that unlocks supernatural favor and provision. Many people strive for success, struggle to make things happen, and force their way into opportunities that seem right. Yet, despite all their efforts, they find themselves frustrated, exhausted, and without results. The truth is, when we surrender to God's will and walk in obedience, doors open effortlessly. What others lay before, we receive as a result of being aligned with his purpose. The world teaches us that we must push, hustle, and manipulate situations to succeed. But the kingdom of God operates differently. Obedience positions us for divine favor, and favor accomplishes what human effort cannot. When we look at the stories of great men and women in the Bible, we see a common pattern. Those who walked in obedience experienced extraordinary breakthroughs. Abraham was instructed to leave his homeland without knowing exactly where he was going. He could have argued, resisted, or tried to negotiate with God, but instead he obeyed, and that obedience led him to become the father of many nations. His willingness to follow God's instruction activated blessings that not only impacted him, but generations after him. Obedience is never just about us. It has a ripple effect that touches those connected to us. One of the most powerful examples of obedience unlocking favor is found in the life of Peter. In Luke 5, Peter had been fishing all night and caught nothing. He was an expert fisherman, someone who knew the waters and the best times to fish. Yet, despite all his experience, his efforts had failed. Then Jesus told him to go out again and cast his net into the deep. From a human perspective, it didn't make sense. Peter could have argued, relied on his own understanding, and ignored the instruction. But instead he said, "Nevertheless, at your word I will let down the net." That moment of obedience changed everything. The Bible says that he caught so many fish that his net began to break, and he had to call for help to bring in the overflow. This is what happens when we obey God. He releases provision beyond our expectations. Many times we struggle unnecessarily because we are leaning on our own understanding instead of trusting in God's direction. We try to calculate, plan, and make things happen on our terms. But favor is not something that can be worked for. It is something that is activated through obedience. God's instructions may not always make sense, and sometimes they will challenge our logic. But when we choose to obey, we step into a realm of divine provision, where things that were once difficult become easy. Obedience also requires trust. There will be times when what God asks us to do is uncomfortable. He may ask us to leave a place, end a relationship, give sacrificially, or take a step of faith into the unknown. Fear often tries to keep us from obeying, making us question whether we heard God correctly. But we must remember that God sees what we cannot. He knows what lies ahead, and when He gives us an instruction, it is always for our benefit. What seems like a risk is actually a setup for greater favor. Consider the story of the widow in 1 Kings 17. She was down to her last meal, preparing to eat it with her son and then die. Then the prophet Elijah came and told her to first make a small cake for him before feeding herself and her son. From a logical standpoint, this seemed unreasonable. How could she give away the little she had when she was already in lack? But she obeyed, and because of that, her jar of flour and oil never ran out. She stepped into a supernatural provision that defied natural limitations. This is what happens when we trust and obey. Many people wonder why they are struggling in certain areas of their lives. They ask God for favor, for increase, for new doors to open, but they have not obeyed the last instruction He gave them. Obedience is often the missing link between where we are and where we desire to be. God does not just bless any path we choose. He blesses the path He has set for us. When we align ourselves with His will, we don't have to beg for blessings. They chase us down. Deuteronomy 28:18. Obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all His commands I give you today. The Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. This verse makes it clear that favor is tied to obedience. The blessings do not just come randomly. They come as a result of following God's instructions. Another reason obedience is so powerful is that it accelerates destiny. There are people who spend years wandering in the wilderness of life simply because they refused to obey when God spoke. The Israelites could have reached the promised land much sooner, but their disobedience kept them wandering for 40 years. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. When we choose to obey immediately, we step into God's timing and experience His promises sooner. When we walk in obedience, God also fights battles for us. There are struggles we don't have to face because our obedience places us under divine protection. Look at Joshua and the Israelites as they marched around Jericho. God gave them a strange instruction to march around the city for 7 days and then shout. Logically, that was not a battle strategy, but because they obeyed, the walls fell without them having to fight. Many times we are fighting unnecessary battles because we are not aligned with God's will. But when we follow His instructions, He goes ahead of us and brings down walls on our behalf. Obedience is not always easy, but it is always rewarding. It requires us to surrender our will, trust God's plan, and take action even when we don't fully understand. But the result is always the same: favor, provision, and divine acceleration. God is not looking for people who are skilled, talented, or connected. He is looking for people who are willing to obey. Because when we obey, we position ourselves for blessings that no human effort could ever achieve. When things don't happen immediately, it doesn't mean God has abandoned you. His timing is perfect, and every delay prepares you for something greater. Many people become discouraged when they don't see instant results. They pray, work hard, and expect things to happen right away, but when doors don't open as fast as they hoped, frustration sets in. They start questioning God, wondering if He has forgotten them or if they did something wrong. But one of the greatest truths in life is that delay is not denial. Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. God's timing is different from ours, and when we trust His process, we will realize that every delay has a purpose. In our fast-paced world, we are conditioned to expect quick results. We want success overnight, breakthroughs in an instant, and prayers answered immediately. But God operates on a different schedule. He sees the bigger picture, and He knows when we are ready to receive what we are asking for. Sometimes He delays things not to punish us, but to prepare us. There are lessons we need to learn, strength we need to develop, and character we need to refine before stepping into certain blessings. What good is receiving something prematurely if we are not mature enough to handle it? One of the best biblical examples of divine delay is Joseph. As a young boy, Joseph had dreams of greatness. He saw visions of himself in a position of authority, but instead of immediately stepping into that role, his journey took a difficult turn. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. To the natural eye, it seemed like everything was going wrong. He could have easily thought that God had forgotten about him, but every trial he faced was part of his preparation. The years of servitude and imprisonment were shaping him into the man who would one day govern Egypt. Had Joseph stepped into leadership prematurely, he might not have been ready to handle the responsibility. But because he endured the delay with faith, he was positioned at the right place at the right time to save an entire nation. Delay is often God's way of building strength in us. Waiting seasons teach us patience, endurance, and trust. They refine our faith and push us to rely on God rather than our own understanding. If everything happened immediately, we would never develop resilience. Consider the example of David. He was anointed as king at a young age, yet he didn't take the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years running from Saul, hiding in caves, and enduring hardship. Why? Because God was shaping him into the leader Israel needed. His experiences in the wilderness taught him how to depend on God, how to lead people with wisdom, and how to fight battles with divine strategy. Had he stepped into kingship immediately, he might not have been the same mighty ruler that he became. When we face delays, we must remember that God is working behind the scenes. Just because we don't see movement doesn't mean nothing is happening. Think about a seed planted in the ground. For weeks, there is no visible sign of growth. But beneath the soil, roots are forming, foundations are being established, and the plant is preparing to break through. If someone were to give up and dig up the seed too soon, they would never see the harvest. The same applies to life. Just because you don't see progress on the surface doesn't mean God is not moving beneath the surface. There are times when we ask for something and God says, "Not yet." This is not rejection, but divine protection. Sometimes we think we are ready for certain blessings, but God knows we are not. He sees the challenges ahead, the potential pitfalls, and the things that could harm us if we receive what we want too soon. What looks like a delay is actually a shield, keeping us from stepping into something prematurely. Think about Moses and the Israelites. God had promised them the land of Canaan, yet they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Was it because God was slow? No, it was because they were not ready. Their hearts needed transformation. They had been delivered from Egypt physically, but mentally they still carried a slave mentality. If God had allowed them to enter the promised land immediately, they would not have been able to sustain the blessing. The delay was necessary for their growth and development. Sometimes delays test our faith. Will we continue to trust God even when we don't see results? Will we remain faithful in the waiting season, or will we give up too soon? Many people miss their breakthroughs because they lose hope right before their appointed time. They quit praying, stop believing, and abandon their faith just before their miracle. But those who hold on, who keep believing despite the wait, will see the fulfillment of God's promises. There are people who waited years for their breakthroughs. Abraham and Sarah waited for a son. Hannah waited for a child. The Israelites waited for their deliverance. But in every case, when the time was right, God came through. His promises never fail, but they manifest at the appointed time. The waiting season is not a wasted season. It is a season of preparation, refining, and alignment. When we embrace this truth, we learn to wait with expectation rather than frustration. Instead of complaining, we prepare. Instead of doubting, we build our faith. We trust that if God has promised something, He will bring it to pass, no matter how long it takes. What we think is a delay is often God's perfect setup for something greater than we imagined. Peace is the proof that God is leading. In a world filled with uncertainty, chaos, and stress, many people are searching for peace. They chase after money, relationships, and success, believing these things will bring them security. But true peace does not come from external circumstances. It comes from knowing that you are walking in God's divine will. When God is leading your life, peace follows. Even in the midst of challenges, there is an inner assurance that everything is working together for your good. Many people confuse peace with the absence of trouble. They believe that if things are going smoothly, then they are in God's will, and if they face difficulties, then they must be on the wrong path. But this is not always the case. The peace that God gives is not dependent on circumstances. It is a deep, unshakable confidence that remains even in the middle of storms. This is why Jesus was able to sleep in the boat while the storm was raging. The disciples were panicked, afraid that they were going to drown, but Jesus rested because he knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. His peace was not based on the storm, it was based on the certainty of God's presence. One of the ways God leads us is through his peace. When we are making decisions, we must pay attention to the presence or absence of peace. If something is not from God, there will be an uneasiness, a sense of restlessness that refuses to go away. No matter how attractive the opportunity looks or how logical the decision seems, if there is no peace, it is a warning sign. On the other hand, when God is leading, even if the path is uncertain, there is a calmness in your spirit that assures you that you are on the right track. Many people have ignored this principle and ended up in situations they later regretted. They felt uneasy about a business deal but went ahead with it, only to experience financial loss. They felt a lack of peace about a relationship but ignored it, only to find themselves in heartbreak. They sensed that a job offer wasn't right for them but accepted it because of the salary, only to realize later that it was not where they were supposed to be. God speaks through peace, and when we ignore that voice, we often walk into unnecessary struggles. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they were led by the presence of God in the form of a cloud by day and fire by night. They didn't have to figure out their own path. They simply had to follow God's leading. Today we may not have a physical cloud or fire to guide us, but we have something even better, his peace. Colossians 3:15 says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." The word rule here means to act as an umpire, just like an umpire in a game decides whether something is in or out. God's peace helps us determine whether a decision is right or wrong. This is why people who truly walk with God have a different kind of confidence. Even when things look uncertain, they are not shaken. They may not have all the answers, but they trust that they are where they are supposed to be. Their peace does not come from knowing all the details. It comes from knowing that God is in control. This is the kind of peace that allowed Paul and Silas to sing praises while in prison. They had every reason to be afraid and discouraged, yet they worshipped because they knew that even in chains, God was still leading them. Many people struggle with anxiety and fear because they are trying to control their own lives instead of allowing God to lead. They are worried about the future, stressed about decisions, and overwhelmed by uncertainty. But peace comes when we surrender to God. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." When we trust God with our plans, He replaces our anxiety with peace. There will be times when God leads us in a direction that does not make sense to others. People may question our choices, wondering why we are walking away from an opportunity, why we are staying in a place when we could leave, or why we are making decisions that seem illogical. But when you have God's peace, you don't need human approval. Peace is confirmation that you are where you need to be. Sometimes, following peace means walking away from something that looks good. It may mean turning down a promotion, ending a relationship, or letting go of a plan you thought was right for you. But if it costs you your peace, it is not worth it. One of the biggest mistakes people make is rushing into decisions without waiting for peace. They let pressure, fear, or emotions drive their choices, and later they suffer the consequences. But those who wait on God's peace never regret their decisions. Even if things don't go as expected, they have the confidence that they were following God's direction. When you are walking in God's will, you don't have to strive to make things happen. What is meant for you will come effortlessly, and what is not meant for you will fall away. Peace is not a luxury, it is a necessity. In a world filled with confusion, uncertainty, and stress, those who are led by God will always stand out. They will move with confidence, make decisions with clarity, and walk through life with an assurance that cannot be shaken. God's peace is proof that you are on the right path. When you have it, hold on to it. When you lack it, pause and seek His direction. When God is leading, peace follows. And when peace is present, you can move forward with faith, knowing that everything will fall into place. Thank you